All right, everyone, welcome back to On the Ball, the video series from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. Couldn't be more excited than to have Shan Foster as the guest today. Shane, you're the first guest whose picture is actually on my wall behind me. I don't know if you remember this program.
I do. I do. I love it. I
Yeah,
absolutely love it.
from 2017. And that was a significant game when y'all beat number one Florida. Not only the fact that you beat number one Florida, but I remember that was in February of that year. And later that afternoon, I gave my girlfriend at the time a bag that had some like Valentine's candies in it. And I asked her, just dump it out on the table and we'll look at all the stuff. And the engagement ring, was in there too. So
Hey,
we got engaged that same day that you beat number one Florida.
that is amazing. Hey, that's a great story. I didn't even know that.
So obviously with Vanderbilt fans, you need no introduction, but for the others, Shane is the all-time leading scorer in Vanderbilt men's basketball history. His jersey was just retired recently. He was SEC Player of the Year. Just a fantastic basketball player, played professionally for several seasons. But I think, Shane, you've gone on to make your biggest contributions to the world since your playing days have been over on issues related to violence against women and diversity, equity, inclusion. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about everything, some basketball, but mostly like what you've been doing after basketball. Um,
Sure.
so for a basketball question, I think those of us who are Vandy fans remember, of course, like senior night. Your senior night is the image that comes to mind with 9 3-pointers, 42 points, overtime win against Mississippi State in your last game that was not televised, so you had to be there to see it. It has all this mystery to it. But was that actually your best game in college? Like, is there, when you look back at your career, is there another game that maybe you didn't make 9 threes, but like meant more to you in any way, or you felt like you played better than that game, or was that it?
Well, that was certainly the game I scored the most points, hit the most meaningful baskets, and really put the team on my shoulders. The game that I think was my most all around complete game was actually when we beat Tennessee when they were number one. That game was on CBS, national televised game, and I remember it was snowing. So, but the students and the fans were still outside the gym waiting to get in as I was showing up for a shoot around before the game. So, and obviously UT was the number one team in the country. The only time in my entire life when I've rooted for UT was when they played Memphis right before coming to Nashville. It's the only time. And so they beat them, took care of business, and then they came to Nashville, and then we took care of business and beating them. I had 32 points. I hit 8 3-pointers in that game, but it was certainly a more well-rounded game. I was shooting fadeaways. I was driving to the basket, scoring, got to the free throw line, hit some threes, had a few dunks. I mean, and that game went down to the wire just as well, and we ended up winning that game also.
And you were rooting for them against Memphis because you wanted them still to be number one when they came into town, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
um, when you look back on your college basketball career, I mean, your team had success in the NCAA tournament, um, some amazing games, a great environment at Memorial Gym. What did you think was the key to the success of the program during that era?
Well, I think the biggest thing, for us was how much our team really gelled together. We were so close as a team, and we did so much on the court as we did off the court. We really had each other's back, really spent a lot of time together, and it showed on the court. When you build that kind of camaraderie and just cohesiveness with the group, then that acronym team, together everyone achieves more. I think that's what happened with us, and all of us was in the locker room crying on that last game as we finished our season, just because We were just so engulfed into that experience and into each other and showing up for each other. It was arguably one of the best times in all of our lives, and I think that was what gave us the edge. That we really did care and love each other so much, and we challenged each other, we held each other accountable, we pushed each other to be the absolute best that we could be, and it showed on the court.
And what were the aspects to the off the court experience of just being a Vanderbilt student that really mattered to you? I know you came up here from Louisiana, so you're entering a new environment. It's not always the easiest place to go to class, but you hope that it's worthwhile and that Vanderbilt degree is going to mean something to you. And I know you played the piano and did a lot of community service projects while you were in town just to get to know, kids and adults in Nashville. But, talk about the off the court experience and maybe any challenges you had there, but also the benefits of being in this environment at Vanderbilt.
Absolutely. Graduating from Vanderbilt was arguably one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was easier to score 42 on Mississippi State. It was easier to beat two number 1 teams in the country while I was there, right? Like it was really, really challenging. But Vanderbilt has more academic support and the resources to be able to close that gap than any school in the country. And so I was very much so very well supported in the academics, and I did well, and I finished, and one of the proudest moments for me and my family was me walking across that stage and graduating, particularly with all of my other classmates. I come from a small town in New Orleans called Kenner, Louisiana. And, in this area, I pretty much knew every single person in my high school, whether they were a coach, a teacher, an administrator, a janitor, all of the students, right? Like I literally knew everyone. And so coming to Vanderbilt, you're not going to know every single person on campus at a university, but I felt pretty good that I knew a lot of people on campus. And the way that I did that was by, like you said, just spending time with people. I would go to on-campus events and I'd be the only athlete there, and they'd be looking around like, what is happening? You're not supposed to be a superstar and be here at this event, right? But I just care about people. I lived on campus all 4 years. And I was intentional about that because I wanted to be amongst the students and really get the most out of the Vanderbilt experience. And so, as a result, I really did. I enjoyed all 4 years that I was there, got a chance to build meaningful, impactful relationships while I was there. And those relationships I get a chance to enjoy and continue to build upon today. Friends of mine that are lawyers that are working at Google and running companies and doing all kind of amazing things, and we're still able to be connected here. Years and years later. And so it's certainly a blessing. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the times that I'd go and sit in David Williams' office, and he'd make time to just talk. Right. And I've said this before, we never talked about basketball. It was always just about, life and the importance of education and giving back and making an impact in community and other people's lives and doing the things that you can do with the position and platforms that you have. David was very influential in my life, and arguably one of the best athletic directors to ever do it. And then of course Candace, she and I was always very close and friends and remain friends today. And it's those kinds of relationships that, while you're in it and you're in school, you don't know that these are people that you're going to, keep in touch with and be meaningful in each other's life for a long time. But it just so happened to work out that way that once I retired from basketball, I moved back to Nashville, and I'm able to continue to nurture and invest in those relationships in a way that's meaningful, not only for me, but hopefully for them as well.
And two themes that emerge later in your life that we'll get to, related to the issue of violence against women and issues related to race and diversity and inclusion. In what ways did your understanding of how to talk about those issues or observations just on how people deal with those issues emerged during your time at Vanderbilt? In what ways had you already been thinking that those are, areas of life that you wanted to be involved in before you got here? But just sort of laying the stage or setting the stage for what you're going to do later. To what extent were you thinking about those issues already while you were a college student?
Yeah, so I talk about this in my book a little bit. As I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, during a time when it was the murder capital of the world, I saw a lot of violence, and I saw the impact that that was having on people, physically, but also emotionally, and mentally, right? And so I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the experiences of people, and when you see domestic violence up close and personal, and you're able to kind of discern the long-term implications of that kind of violence, and then you learn about the statistics. 1 in 4 women experiencing domestic violence, 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted. 1 out of every 7 boys being sexually abused, and then you lay that next to, parallel to, your life experience. And for me, being an athlete, those were things that I didn't necessarily find myself being a part of or experiencing outside of what I saw in New Orleans, growing up. And so I would often say that everybody should be treated like an athlete at least one day in their life, because it's as if you live in a different world. You don't deal with a lot of those other things, that other people deal with. And so, and also my dad was always, making sure that I understood, that with these skills and the ability comes the responsibility, to be conscious and aware of how other people are interacting and experiencing various spaces that I'm in, and how I can improve those spaces for them, because I'm in this space where I'm not dealing with those kinds of things, be it financial, or be it community, or be it, socially. I tell the story about how during a time in American history where racial profiling was happening quite often and police brutality was at a height. I was getting pulled over by police officers in Nashville left and right. Whether I was driving across campus or I was driving back from New Orleans, going to New Orleans, I was always getting stopped by a police officer. But I also always wore Vanderbilt gear, or had, my license plate that had Vanderbilt on it, and so oftentimes when I'd get pulled over, the officers would say, "Hey, I'm sorry, Mr. Foster, I didn't know it was you. Have a good day."
Mm.
And so again, I'm having the same experience from getting pulled over while Black, but once they see who I am and recognize me, then I'm having a drastically different experience than other people who look like me. And so I've always been aware of that and conscious of that. And then I think it was important to me coming to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt was a bit of a culture shock for me, because I had never been around so many white people in my life. I mean, growing
Mm.
up in New Orleans, I was in a small community, and everybody for the most part looked like me or was a minority. And so I was accustomed to that environment. And then I come to Vanderbilt, and it's, about 70% white. And so, I got an opportunity to see the hearts of people and the backgrounds and upbringing of people that didn't necessarily match, the negative sides of American history and even present day circumstances. And so I got a chance to live amongst people and experience people and to be exposed to people in a way, that a lot of people don't get. Again, being an athlete, the white people that I was encountering all had an affinity for me because I was playing basketball and wearing our logo and our brand and representing this university. So everybody treated me above average, above great, right? Like it was absolutely amazing. And so my relationship with people who don't look like me is very different than my brothers and sisters. It's very different than my cousins. It's very different than my friends and colleagues and peers, even now, across the city. And so I do think it's my responsibility, to whom much is given, much is required. And so because I have those relationships in every demographic, in every background, and because people have an affinity for me and treat me a little bit differently, then my responsibility is to make sure that everyone becomes aware of how everyone is experiencing life,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the community of Nashville. And so I've kind of dedicated my life to ending violence against women and girls, and also eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, dignity, justice, freedom for all, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work within companies and organizations, not even just in Nashville, but nationally, because we need a lot of help. Most people are not bad people. Most people have very good intentions, and we all want the same thing, but we've all not been exposed to each other, I think, the way that I have and many others have. And as a result, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of combativeness, there's a lot of going back and forth. And once we are able to create the space for people to just build on those commonalities, and see each other's heart and see the humanity in us all, I've seen people treat each other very well.
Okay. Wow, a lot to that's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of different roads I'd like to go on. Before we do that, you did play professionally in Europe, and I've heard you tell a story about an experience you had there in terms of, being labeled as an American, and how that was a little bit different than what you'd experienced actually while living in America. Can you share that story?
Absolutely. I was in Belgium, playing ball, and me and my teammates decided to go out to this bar. And we got there and went in and was at the bar ordering drinks. And then all of a sudden there's this commotion and ruckus going on. And it's in the back of the bar, but it's coming towards us. And we start hearing them saying things like, F you, you American, F you, get out of here. You don't belong here, that kind of thing. And so obviously we felt unsafe. This kind of thing don't happen in America. We got to get out of here. So we all left. And when I get to my car, I turn around, this guy is like right behind me, and he's yelling and screaming, F you, you American. And in that moment, it dawned on me, this is the first time in my entire life I've been called an American. And I live in America. I was born in America. I'm building a life in America, but only in another country am I seen as American. With this experience of being American comes a lot of things. But there's a difference between the way my white brothers and sisters experience America and the way that I do, even as an athlete who has a certain level of privilege. And so that was a very eye-opening experience for me. Every other time in my life, I'm Black American, I'm African American. I mean, you name it. But that was the time, being in another country, where I was actually seen as an American, and it had a negative connotation. They weren't praising, they weren't excited about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? They were telling me to get out of their space.
Yeah. I know for a lot of athletes, the transition from that period of being either a college or a professional athlete into entering the regular working world, can be very challenging. And your identity, you've worked your whole life to become among the best in the world at a certain skill, and then all of a sudden that skill doesn't pay the bills anymore, and like, how do you see yourself? What are you going to do next? How was that transition for you?
It was a roller coaster of emotions. I think it was depressing because, as you said, I've spent my whole life just thinking about basketball and thinking that basketball was going to be the thing that carried me for the rest of my life. But I found out that, God had better plans for me, and it wasn't just about bouncing a ball and scoring points and dunking on people and all that kind of stuff, traveling the world. But it was about how I could impact people and really make a difference. And so once I really figured out that I needed to change course, I decided to retire, and found out pretty quickly that while you have a lot of transferable skills as an athlete, you have no work experience. And so that was also, what played a role in me retiring so early after 6 years of playing professionally, is that I started looking around and seeing that, hey, if I'm going to do something different, I need to learn business acumen. I need to understand the marketplace. I need to understand the gifts and the talents and the skills that I have and how they fit into capitalism and how it's currently working. And so I decided to retire early and start that process so that as I got older, I could then be building something that could be sustainable. I came back to Nashville. One of the first people I met with was David Williams. Sat down and we talked about, what that could look like. And he challenged me to not just go get a job. He felt like, being in Nashville, particularly, I could go and do anything and make money. That wasn't going to be the issue, but I had a real opportunity based on my legacy at Vanderbilt to be able to do something that would outlive me, something that would truly be impactful and build legacy. And so, going through that process, I got approached. I could have went into banking and finance and wealth management and real estate and things that probably would have been a lot more lucrative. But helped to start a charter school here in Nashville, Intrepid College Prep. And then I got involved with the YWCA, building the program of Men Together that engages men to end violence against women and girls. And that was the place where I was able to really make that connection between my gifts and talents, my network, and making a real impact for people and for organizations. And so, I've been able to provide sexual harassment and violence prevention training all over the world. Been able to speak on various stages, hosted a national conference here in Nashville in partnership with Vanderbilt University. David was a large part of pulling that all together, and just continue to build my business acumen to the point where now I own my own consulting company and do a lot of traveling around the world, helping companies large and small on the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can get better to a place where we're recognizing each other's humanity and treating each other accordingly, and seeing the benefits and the value that comes when we handle things in that manner. And so that's been my transition. It's been a wonderful transition filled with ups and downs. But I can also see how many other athletes and teammates of mine get stuck because you spend your whole life thinking that you're going to play that one sport or be in that particular field. And if that's not necessarily paying the bills, then you have to course correct and find something else. And everyone doesn't find it as fast as I did. And many are struggling to find meaning, to find identity, to find their purpose and path in life. And the Vanderbilt degree is amazing and wonderful, and certainly opens some doors. But at the end of the day, it may not always produce the level of income that you're accustomed to or that's needed in an ever-growing society. And so there's certainly more to be desired when it comes to making good on the promise of that Vanderbilt degree and turning that into sustainable income.
Absolutely. And with the Men Together, I know that it's talking about the issue of violence against women, domestic violence to men, and to understanding that this is, if it was just up to women, this would have been solved a long time ago, right? And that men need to be talking about this issue. Men need to be thinking differently. And I know you speak to kids a lot, but also, to grown men. What have you found to be the messages that are a real turning point, and actually do get men or boys to think differently and to act differently about this issue in your experience? Like, what's the real message that has resonated the most?
Well, I think the most important thing is recognizing the humanity in us all, in that hurt people hurt other people. And violence is a learned behavior. Nobody came into this world being violent as a child. That was taught. Sometimes that was taught through our interactions with our parents, people who were supposed to love us, people who were supposed to show us the way, and they showed us the way not to go. And it was very damaging and traumatic. Sometimes it was in other authority positions in our life that abused their position of power, and treated us a certain way. And then as a result, we've then turned that into how we treat other people. All of it has been learned behaviors. And if it can be learned, it can also be unlearned. Most importantly, it can be taught differently. And giving people the autonomy and the permission to choose for themselves how they show up for themselves, how they show up for each other in relationships, and how they show up in community. That's been the biggest thing that has resonated with people, because it's not an indicting approach. I'm not pointing fingers, telling men that they're wrong and they need to do all this stuff differently. We get to that point, but the most important thing is reconnecting people's head with their heart, and getting folks to understand that the way in which we've been acting and behaving has been what was handed to us from the past generation. It's not something we ever chose. It's literally the expectations that are set around manhood and masculinity and how you're supposed to show up in a relationship and what you're supposed to do. And we've created this box of do's and don'ts for men, and we hold each other accountable for that. And nobody ever questioned it. Nobody ever stopped to say, is this helpful? Is it harmful? How is this actually, turning into actions and behaviors, from the music we listen to the movies and TV shows we watch, to our interactions with people as we live our lives on autopilot? All of it is informing our actions and behaviors, and it's either having a positive impact or a negative one. And we don't take enough time as people stopping to consider what those impacts are and whether or not that's something we choose. And so not only has this work been empowering for many across the country, those who are adults and those who are children, but it's also been empowering and liberating for me as an individual as I do this work. My relationships are better and stronger and more nurturing. And, I'm a better version of myself because I've learned to choose for myself how I show up in all of those spaces. So that's what I would say really resonates with people the most. Of course, for men, when you consider the women and girls in your life that you're close to, of course, it's earth-shattering to think that people that we love and care for are experiencing this kind of violence. And for some, that's enough to get them involved and engaged. But most importantly, the thing that sustains the engagement, the thing that gets people talking about this at their kitchen table when I'm not there, is understanding that more than likely we've been hurt too. More than likely we've had bad role models and examples in our lives, and we start to see the connection between those external forces and how we're showing up today. And it's the empowering to be able to choose for ourselves how we show up.
Fascinating. And on the DEI side, I mean, you've started Fostering Healthy Solutions. I've followed your social media. I know you're all over the country and the world, talking about these issues. And it seems like it'll be a really interesting time to be in this business. DEI is under fire, in some states, some governors and legislators banning the DEI programs at universities, other people, calling the whole exercise woke in a derogatory way. People who believe in it thinking that maybe the DEI programs don't go far enough, or that the people who really need to be there don't show up. And it's preaching to the choir when there is this opportunity to engage in these discussions. We've had politicians running on what I would call racist platforms and winning, so like, what an important time to be in this field. But what, it's not like you're going to universal support every company you show up at, probably. So what has this been like for you these last couple of years?
It's been interesting. I've done over 160 corporate workshops with C-suite executives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's been interesting to go and see behind the veil, right? Like people have their perception of what's happening in business and how leaders are thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to go and do the work and create the safe space to hear directly from them about, where the trigger points are, what's resonating, what's not resonating, what's working, what's not working, what are the fears that exist around this. I've been able to get a pretty interesting insight into where people are. And what I'll tell you is the loudest voices are not necessarily the majority. I think we've reached a point in our society where people now more than ever understand the gulf that exists between the lived experience of our white brothers and sisters and the lived experiences of minorities. And because over time, we've started to experience life more together than separate, it's become more apparent and in our face what those experiences actually are and how they're impacting our quality of life collectively. People don't want their kids growing up in a society where police brutality can happen in their neighborhood. People don't want, for example, in Nashville right now, to have to be in schools where kids don't feel safe going to school because of mass shootings that are happening. People don't want to work in companies where they are completely tone deaf to the experiences of people, of our neighbors, of our friends, right? You have more interracial marriages that have happened over the years. You have LGBTQ plus that have gotten not only gay rights, but gay marriage and so forth and so on. And so we're starting to do life more together than separate. And as a result, that's changing how people are perceiving the way that life should be. I think there's still a long way to go, because anytime you interrupt norm, the status quo, there are going to be people who have to change the way in which they've been doing things and operating, even when some of those things we've enjoyed. For example, I had one CEO get really upset that because of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the higher education space, and particularly on university campuses in the admissions office, that his daughter, a young white female, was not admitted into the school of her choice because that school decided to admit, for the first time in the school's history, 34% minorities. And I stopped him as he was talking about this, and I said, hold on a second. You're saying that you're upset that they didn't get into their school of choice because 34% minorities got in. I said, doesn't that mean that 66% of the admissions were white? And you're saying you want more than that? How does that sound? And it was as if he had never thought about that. It had never crossed his mind. It didn't register to him that that was what he was saying until that moment. And I bring that up because it's so critical that we begin to have these conversations. I really do believe in my heart, and maybe it's naive, but I believe that most people are good, that they want the same things, and that they actually stand on the morals and values that we're talking about with our families and trying to instill in our children. But because we've lived a life that has not been inclusive, in fact, it's been intentionally exclusive, then there are many benefits that we've received that have been completely unfair to everyone else that's living in these spaces that we've never stopped to consider, realize, or bump up against. And so now, because of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, we're being asked to sit and consider things that it was not a priority to consider before, like the experiences of various people and communities within the workplace. That involves hiring decisions, promoting decisions, our policies, our workplace culture, how we define it, who defines it, how everyone is experiencing the workplace. I mean, all of these things, we've never had to stop and consider how people who identify differently than white are actually having those experiences. And so I think there's a lot of change that's happening. Of course, there's going to be scrutiny and judgment because there's a lot of people who, quite frankly, don't want things to change. You know, for that CEO that I was talking about, he's accustomed to his kids going to whatever school they want to go to. He doesn't want that to change. At the same time, it's not fair that everyone doesn't have that same ability solely based on the color of their skin or solely based on how they identify and choose to live their lives, not based on merit. There's a lot of qualified people across the board, right? But those are some of the things that are changing and need to change. And quite honestly, there's been a lot of investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion by companies large and small, but it's been too event focused.
Right.
There's been a lot of celebration of various communities and uplifting and a lot of philanthropic efforts. But the thing that really is going to move the needle is when we focus our attention on improving economics in various communities such that people can be more inclusive than exclusive in their quality of life. And so it's one thing to say, hey, let's go educate each other on various communities and how people are experiencing the world. It's another thing to stop and realize that that experience includes economics. And if we don't change the economics, then we don't change the quality of life, which means this becomes a revolving door. And so that is the place where efforts are falling short, not because the education and the expertise is not pushing companies and leaders into that direction, but I do think that there's resistance to the economics of it, and it's disheartening. And hopefully we'll get to a place where we can turn the corner on that and see the real movement and change that is necessary. Because celebrating and doing events and talking about various topics and unconscious bias training, all this stuff, right? Like, it's really important, but if we don't change the economics, we don't change the reality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Shane, I know you have a busy day ahead of you. This has been a fascinating discussion. I could do this all day. Really am proud to call you a good friend, and I always enjoy seeing you around town. For people who are interested maybe in bringing you in to speak to their company or on DEI issues, or want to be involved in the work you're doing on domestic violence, or want to read your book, what are the various ways that they can get in touch with you and further this discussion in their own lives?
Absolutely. So you can find us online. Our website is fosteringhealthysolutions.com. For all diversity, equity, and inclusion work. You can also follow Men Together, which is amentogether.org. So you can find us there. We're on every social media platform, so you can look us up there. The book that I wrote and authored, called What Hurt Didn't Hinder, where I tell my entire life story up to the point where I'm at today, can be found on Amazon as well. So would love to connect and engage with everyone around these much needed issues.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Shane. You have a great day. You got any picks for the Final Four coming up, men's or women's?
Man, I think Miami and UConn are playing great basketball right now, but you never know. It's a toss-up right now, man.
Yeah. I'm looking forward also to the Iowa-South Carolina game on the women's side tonight. I think that's going to be a fantastic game. But Shane, thank you for what you do in the world, and I'll be seeing you around soon. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me.